When you use the heat gun, be sure to put it on the lower setting. You want to pay attention to the movement of the heat gun. You want to make sure that you pull it back quickly, because once the plastic starts heating up, it's going to melt really quickly, and you want it to maintain a somewhat bowl shape. And in order to do that, you have to go back and forth, heat it up, pull it back quickly, because as you can see, it curls up pretty fast. And you just work your way around, and I use the stick to help it. And you'll find that once you pull the heat gun back, the plastic itself isn't that warm. It cools off pretty quickly. And you can somewhat manipulate it, but don't plan on it. You'll notice once you put the heat in the very middle, the sides start rolling up. So the technique I use is to do the outer edges first and then shoot some heat down in the center. You do want the center shrunken a little bit, because if it's not thick in the middle, then when you use the glue gun to glue it onto the paper, you'll get a hole in the plastic because the hot glue is just so hot. So just keep working with it. You flip it over to thicken up the bottom a little bit. Here's a smaller version using the same technique. I'm doing more in the middle here. You can see how it lifts up fairly quickly. And you do want it to shrink a little bit, not just fold up a little bit. You want it to shrink a little bit so that it gets a little hardened and thicker around the edges. And the pan will get hot, so just be aware. And make sure when you set down the heat gun that you set it down on the pan. It will melt plastic. I have personal experience with that. And this is the final piece. Okay, here's an example of a scrap piece of plastic that's been colored on. Try to encourage the kids to keep the pieces as long as possible. That way there's more to work with when it comes to combining them and creating some kind of sculpture. The kids can color on these later, but the issue is going to be having the markers available to them, because of course they're going to be used in the other classrooms. But once you get some scraps, you can start melting those too. I'm thinking that you're probably going to have to melt them after the class period is over. So if you don't have time, just put them in a plastic bag, and hopefully you can get to them later. If not, if you can just shoot me an email and say, hey, I just don't have time to do it, then I'll be happy to take the plastic bag of scraps and melt them down, and that way each classroom can have their own sculpture. You'll notice I'm picking it up with my hands here, and as long as you keep the heat away from your hands, you should be good. A little bit easier to control. And with the thin strips, it's a little bit easier. You can kind of melt the plastic. I'm sorry, form the plastic or move the plastic a little bit before it cools. So I'm just trying to thicken up the edges a little bit and give it a real sculptural look here. The final piece is going to look something like this. Then you're going to want to gather all the different pieces, and I haven't quite figured out how we're going to attach them yet. Maybe with some string, maybe with a little hot glue, but I'm going to play around with them and I'll let you know when I figure it out. And this is the inspiration for gathering the scraps. So hopefully we can make something just as beautiful. You're going to take two 6-inch squares and glue the white on top of the black. For the younger grades, you might want to do this ahead of time, depending on how much time you think it's going to take for their skill level. But it's relatively simple for the older grades. You can see how easily it's done. Just make sure that when they flip it over that they have a corner big enough so that they can write their name with a silver marker.